This video is supported by patrons like you. If you'd like to become a patron, please head over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo. You know, it's always telling when major movie news drops after hours on a weekday. So Monday, just a couple hours after the release of The Mandalorian's first trailer that everyone was hyped about, news broke that Dan and Dave, the creators of Game of Thrones, so D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, left Star Wars. They walked away from Star Wars. They put down their lightsabers and their blasters and their Darth Vader helmets, and they pimped the F out of Lucasfilm. Who would do such a thing? Why would you do such a thing? It's crazy, right? Well, honestly, Netflix is a really big reason for that. It's not because they were fired, as some people have been attempting to make the claim. They were paid a lot more money by Netflix to go and create exclusive content for them. And whatever you want to say about Game of Thrones Season 8, it was still more popular than not. And there are people out there that claim that everyone hates it. It's not true at all. It's still won Best Drama Series. It's still won a bunch of other awards, and a lot of people still watched it, and a lot of people still liked it. There's a vocal group that didn't like it, and that's fine. At the end of the day, though, it's still more popular and beloved than not. I think that's something people need to consider, but anyway, you have your opinions, I have mine. But what we're finding out now, and this just dropped on Variety about an hour and a half ago, is Star Wars Inside, the Game of Thrones creators exit and the pressures facing Lucasfilm. Now, this is an interesting piece because it does give us a bit of, albeit, not 100% confirmed, but this is coming from some high-tier writers, Justin Kroll over at Variety, who does have his own connections, to get more of the behind-the-scenes scoop of what's going on. And while I do think it ultimately does spell doom for Kathleen Kennedy, because it shows you her management style is not going to attract the talent that's going to put Star Wars back on the map, at least in the terms theatrically speaking, right? But we are going to find out a bit more about Game of Thrones. So let's just jump through it here, starting with it. It's almost become comical. On Monday, Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss came the latest high-profile talents to part ways with Star Wars before their movies hit theaters. They're part of a revolving door of A-list directors who have found it impossible to realize their visions in a corporate culture that is said to invite little creative independence and argument. They joined the ranks of Josh Trank, Colin Trevorrow, Phil Lord, and Chris Miller in being summarily dismissed from Star Wars productions they were intended to helm. In films of the size and scale of Star Wars, it's not unheard of for productions to run into heated creative disagreements, but the high rate of turnover is raising eyebrows across Hollywood and among the rabid base of fans. It's also inspiring questions about the management style of Kathleen Kennedy, the executive tasked with guiding Lucasfilm and with finding fresh ways to expand a galaxy far, far away. And she's had a lot of problems with that. She really, really, really has. I do believe that in essence, they have focused more on recreating the EU and having the new canon rather than putting that information in the movies. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there with the new canon that really does open up and extrapolate upon ideas that are not properly discussed in the movies. Again, like there's some theories out there based on current canon about the ending of The Rise of Skywalker that, if true, would literally, in my opinion, blow fans away and completely just reinvigorate the fan base. And for that, I recommend Popcast. The Popcast guys have a video about Dark Ray. Fantastic. I'm going to link to it in the video description. You all should go watch it. It's 28 minutes. That's why I'm not doing it here. Anyway, we know things have been bad for Kathleen Kennedy because what people like Grace Randolph are saying is that Bob Iger effectively is running Lucasfilm right now. Like everything stops with him, right? All the creative decisions, major creative decisions go through him, and that's that. And that would make sense considering that they spent $1 billion on Galaxy's Edge for both, each park was $1 billion and it's failed to connect in the way that a lot of people want. When I was there a few months ago, I kind of called it a Star Wars mall. And it is, and I had fun, but that's basically what it is. And don't worry, I have a bunch of footage I shot that will be coming out soon, I promise. Anyway, this is what people are saying. It says it's like if you take a job as a Star Wars director or creator, you're automatically thrown in the Sarlacc pit, and your chances of getting out and making that film are so unlikely. You have to almost be a Jedi Master, says Jeff Brock, box office analyst. It's very true. I mean, look at James Mangold. James Mangold was announced as the director of a Boba Fett movie the day before Solo released on May 24th of 2018. And he's not even mentioned in this, by the way. That's how dead that project was. It was announced, and then it was silently killed. And that's a lot of it, is if you step onto this thing, you don't have a high chance of getting what you want done. Now, it goes on to say, even directors who retain credit for the work experienced issues. Rogue One helmer Gareth Edwards was essentially replaced by screenwriter Tony Gilroy during the reshoots, although he was ultimately the one credited with directing the finished product. Truth be told, Tony Gilroy did so well on that they're bringing him back to write and direct the Cassian Andor series. So there's a lot of interesting things there in regards to like how it all came together. And no one really talks much about the Tony Gilroy situation and how much work he had to do to help cobble that movie to, and like, let's be fair, the greatness that it was. Rogue One, I believe, even amongst Disney Star Wars haters, Rogue One is heralded as a good movie. Now, when Kennedy and her team pitched these filmmakers on joining the family, sources say they were promised some measure of creative control. However, multiple insiders said new ideas were commonly shot down, as Kennedy and her team were only looking for people to stick to the company line. If disagreements about the direction of the film became too intense, it usually led to that person leaving the project rather than attempting to find common ground. The Lucasfilm brain trust would often turn to new writers such as Lord and Miller before ultimately retreating to old standbys such as Lawrence Kasdan, the Empire Strikes Back writer, who is still seen as a key sounding board on the productions. Even if the lack of an appetite for creative risk isn't to blame, there are questions about whether the abrupt departures of key talent points to a problem in how directors and writers are being vetted and hired. See, and this is where I think we're running into a bit of an issue here. So to kind of go to give, I think, a bigger abstract of that, or it's a bigger idea. So what they're talking about here is Lucasfilm as a whole is crafted, and this is Kennedy's job, is to create an ecosystem of Star Wars content, right? So that is the movies as the top, right? That's the top of the pyramid, the movies, but everything flows upward. You've got to have the books, the comics, the toys, the merch, the video games, right? Everything else has to tie into that particular thing. And it's not working out as well as they want on a multitude of ways. The books have their audience, but it does kind of come across like required reading in some of these situations. And a lot of people out there aren't diving into the books because they're also not as heavily promoted to casual fans. I think if they were more promoted to casual fans, they would probably find themselves in better company. Disney and Lucasfilm are waiting for word of mouth to push this kind of stuff. Why do you think that Lucasfilm and Disney just struck a deal with an online Chinese blogger who's very popular, who goes by the name His Majesty the King in China, to write a Chinese-themed Star Wars story that's going to be canon as a way to sell books and therefore sell the legacy, sell to China? Because they know that out of the 421 million people who read online ebooks every single month, that is a potential big audience, grander than the entirety of the United States population, to dive in to this stuff if they can get them hooked, which is why they're spending the money for that grassroots campaign. This is not about the movies anymore. This is about trying to push everything else. And that is probably where there's a big problem here, because these directors, these creatives, they're not going to toe the company line because they don't have to toe the company, because the company line in this case is not the movies. It's not the story. We know they have no plan. We know they had no plan. Their plan for the Skywalker saga, to finish it out, wasn't to tell you a cohesive 3-act story. It was to get you hooked on it in order to sell you the ancillary stuff, in order to push the narrative further for their non-movie or non-TV entities, those books and stuff. And that is really telling now after reading this. And trust me, it does get more interesting. So it goes on to say that Benioff and Weiss had ambitious plans to take Star Wars universe in a new direction, one that would exist apart from the Skywalker family saga, that comprised the franchise's centerpiece of 9 films. The Star Wars period the pair were interested in was how the Jedi came to exist. However, Lucasfilm executives and the creators began to see their visions for the films diverge in meetings last summer. News that the pair had signed a massive $250 million production deal with Netflix was a signal to many that they were eager to explore other opportunities. It also brought pressures. When the pact was announced, Netflix said that it was aware of the duo's commitments, but insiders said that they were also wary of waiting as much as 4 years for them to wrap up work on Star Wars. The streaming service wanted wanted Benioff and Weiss to focus on creating exclusive movies and shows for them, particularly when they looked at the streaming landscape that is growing more competitive with the launch of Disney Plus and HBO Max. And here's the thing with that. So think about that for a second, right? We learned in April at Star Wars Celebration that Rian Johnson, Dan and Dave, and Kathleen Kennedy are going to get together for a weekend, a Star Wars Summit in May, to hammer out the next 10 years. We learned that the next 10 years of content. That's what they were working on. And what happened? All the talks began to fall apart. So Kathy was like, we want, maybe, I don't know what they want, but maybe they want something like post the First Order to be able, or post the saga, in order to still use elements that they've already created here, like the First Order remnants or something, or Rey or Finn or Poe or something along those lines, to keep those characters, which have their own fan bases, but to keep them moving. And Dan and Dave are like, no, let's go back. Let's take it way back to the beginning of the Jedi. Let's explore that time period, which is cool, which could be potentially in the Knights of the Old Republic era a little bit. We all wanted Knights of the Old Republic. That's what we want. But then that started to fall apart, and they were being courted by many studios. They were being courted by many different studios, and Netflix came in and dropped $250 million for a 5-year commitment, knowing that these guys were still working on Star Wars, meaning that they were only probably going to write and produce one movie and then go work to Netflix. But I think at the end, Netflix pressured them, probably with the promise of more money, in order to get them to walk away, especially once talks fell apart with Lucasfilm and Dan and Dave, especially Kathleen Kennedy and Dan and Dave, all because the writers group, I think, they want to push their stories that are going to be in the comics and the books and stuff. That's what they want to push. That's what I'm telling you. That's what all this is around right now. This is all about that. But this is where things get really, really, really crazy. So as relations with Benioff and Weiss curdled, the studio had begun taking general meetings with other writers on possible Star Wars pitches. It's unclear if these were just sit-downs or exploring other related productions in the franchise's cinematic and streaming universe. The departure of the two likely sends the studio back to the drawing board, with the future of the series more uncertain than it's been since Disney closed its $4 billion deal with Lucasfilm in 2012. This December brings Rise of the Skywalker, and with it the end of the 9-film series. Abrams has been one of the few directors who has been able to successfully navigate the Lucasfilm landscape, but he has a mega deal with Warner Media that will likely mean he won't be making any more Star Wars films. Rian Johnson, who oversaw the more divisive The Last Jedi, was said to get along with Kennedy and has maintained that he had creative freedom, but fans balked at some of his decisions. He had been hired to oversee a separate trilogy of Star Wars films, which remains in development. Although generally means it's kind of dead. Although it's unclear how far along the work is on the production. On the streaming front, they talk about The Mandalorian and everything else. Okay, think about that for a second, right? Think about that. They started taking meetings with other writers for pitches, right? They started taking other meetings. So when Kathleen Kennedy hired Dan and Dave, which was in February 2018, a month and a half or 2 months roughly after The Last Jedi, after the backlash began, knowing that Solo was coming up and knowing that fans were not looking at Solo positively after The Last Jedi, she did something bold, which was hire the guys from the most popular TV show in the world to write a Star Wars trilogy. Or, well, they said a series of films, but whatever. It was a trilogy. That was her big saving grace. That's what I think nailed her down for another 3 years, because she had brought in Dan and Dave, and she could go to Bob Iger and say, these are my guys. These are my guys. These are my dudes. These guys, I brought them in. I brought the Game of Thrones guys in. And then it's possible, though, that the fallout from season 8 of Game of Thrones might have been a bit of an issue as well. But, you know, even though Iger has said that they put out too much Star Wars too quick, which I think is a load of crap, there is this next bit here, which concerns whether or not Kathleen Kennedy is going to actually end up writing out the remainder of her contract. The sources at the studio insist that Kennedy's job is secure despite the churn of filmmaking talent, but insiders at talent agencies believe that top filmmakers may become wary of working on the series, particularly if the end result will be an embarrassing dismissal. Star Wars fans did receive some welcome news when it was revealed that Kevin Feige, the executive credited with guiding the Marvel Cinematic Universe, will work on a standalone Star Wars film. That led to speculation that Feige might be brought in to stabilize Lucasfilm, but insiders say there's no plan to give him a larger role in that division. Now, they also do say here that ultimately analysts say that Star Wars brand is potent enough to withstand all of the behind-the-scenes drama. With the exception of Solo, the movies haven't just been hits, they've been box office juggernauts with few equals, and that is actually true. They have been hits, they've been pretty big. Not everyone hits the $1 billion mark. So that is a fair thing to say. But if it's true that Iger is the one that's calling the shots, and Iger is the one who probably put Kevin Feige in place at Lucasfilm to work on a movie, if it's just doing one movie, it's just there to test the waters. Because when you say that Kevin Feige is doing a Star Wars movie, I think a lot of people stopped caring about the Dan and Dave movie. I think they were like, wait, Feige's working on a movie. Can this be the 2022 movie? Can this be that film? Let's do that instead. Let's do that instead. We don't, like, that's what people want. And coming off the box office results of not only Captain Marvel, but Endgame and Spider-Man, all 3 Feige productions this year, all 3 to crack $1 billion. And in the case of Endgame, the highest grossing film of all time with $2.8 billion. It's in their best interest, now that Dan and Dave have walked away, to look right at Feige and go, what you got? Let's get something ready for 2022. That's what fans want. And fans are going to, if that is what happens, fans are going to look at that and they're going to see leadership with Lucasfilm. They don't see leadership with Kathleen Kennedy. Kennedy is stuck trying to run a business. She's stuck trying to navigate the 4-quadrant aspect of Star Wars, right? The movies, the shows, the merch, everything else. And so this is where her story group is the ones that are ultimately calling a lot of the shots here from a creative aspect, because they're the ones that are trying to push everything else out there, yet for some reason is barely reflected in the movies themselves or the content themselves. And it's all meant to serve as just a behind the scenes, this is the other stuff that's gone on. So the problem here is, I think, the story group, because they're not interested in theatrical releases. They're just simply not. They are going to sell books and comics and merch and everything else because that's what they're paid to do. And Kennedy, it seems, is listening to them. So, and here's the biggest deal with this, right? If top tier directors and top tier writers and top tier actors walk away from Star Wars, that spells doom for the franchise. It really does. It's not that they necessarily need them in order to sell it, but it really helps. People who are against Disney Star Wars look at The Mandalorian before we saw any trailers, and they were like, I'm going to give this the benefit of the doubt. Why? Because Jon Favreau is a huge Star Wars fan, and he did Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, and people trust him. And Dave Filoni, who people who know Star Wars, who know Rebels and Clone Wars, really trust. And that is why people are willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. You need someone at Lucasfilm that fans trust. Fans do not trust Kathleen Kennedy. It's why when they said Feige is going to be coming into play, everyone lost their mind, because they trust him. And without that, movies don't do as well. I'm just saying. That's the truth, and you guys know it. Anyway, this video is far too long, but I just saw the article and I wanted to respond to it. Your thoughts, your opinions, let me know down in the comments below. If you made it this far, type in Lucasfilm in the chat so I know and I appreciate it. If you guys are a new patron, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You keep me doing this every single day, and I love you greatly for it. Have yourself a great day, everybody. I'll talk to you all later, and peace out.